Hey everybody, and we are back here inside of Conduit for the tutorial. The next thing we're going to do is talk about loads inside of system equipment, inside of Conduit. You add loads up here at the top. You can add power sources, distribution equipment. Down at the bottom there we have loads. So the first thing we're going to add is a motor. So we're going to tap on this piece of equipment. The motor name, we'll call this motor AC. We want to say that there is, yes indeed, a disconnect. We'll say it's 3-phase, 4-wire. We're going to put it in one of those PP panels. So we'll say it's 277, 480. Say it's, 10 horsepower and 60 amps. Say. Add this raceway. Connect this upstream to panel PP2, say for instance. We're going to add a breaker here, and it's going to have 2 raceways, a disconnect, and our motor AC there. So we'll say that this is PVC headed up to that roof. What we say it's 60 amps. We'll say it's 1.5-inch conduit for 60 amps. We'll say it's number 6. I think that'll do it. And then we'll say 45 feet long with 4 more conductors. Go in here and hit update raceway. And so we've got it's a label on that raceway now. And then we'll say this is also 1.5-inch PVC on the secondary side of that disconnect. We'll say it's number 6 again, with it's just 30 feet long. We'll have a few more. So now we update that raceway. We've got all the details, and we'll go in here to this. We'll say this disconnect is 3-phase, 4-wire as well. We'll say it has a fuse, and we'll say the fuse size is also 60 amps. Update that disconnect, and so now the only thing left is the breaker. We'll say it's a 60 amp breaker, 3-pole. So now we've got this whole run down to our motor AC out there, and we're starting to really build out this single line diagram. So we've added that motor. The next thing I want to show you though is adding what we call a generic load. So we're going to add that generic load to panel RP1 here. So up here on the top we're going to hit the plus button again, and we're going to say generic load. Now this generic load can be anything. So we didn't want to have all kinds of variations. This could be a receptacle load, which is what we're going to call it. We're going to call it receptacle. Receptacle load. We'll say that it is single phase, 2-wire, so it's 120 volts. We'll say it's 20 amps. We'll add this generic load. I'm going to say connect upstream to RP1 here. It's going to draw us a line. We'll say this is a 20 amp breaker. 3-phase, single phase. Update that breaker, and we'll say that this raceway is flexible conduit. We'll say it's EMT. We'll say it's 3/4 inch and number 12 wire. We'll say it's 45 feet long with a few more in there. We'll update that raceway. Now, this is a receptacle circuit. It's a generic load. I want to be clear that we don't really expect inside of Conduit for you to add every single branch circuit out there. So another option is to tap on panel RP1 here and hit add a breaker, and it's going to immediately label that downstream breaker a spare, just because it doesn't know anything about it. But when you tap on it, you can say, well, there is a breaker in here. It has a trip rating of say 40 amps. And you can say, is it a spare or not? If you say it's not a spare, we're going to assume that it's a load. And it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to tell us what load it is. You're just going to say that it's a connected breaker inside of that piece of equipment. You can say it's a branch circuit, say yes, and we'll say it's a 3-phase, 40 amp breaker. It is not a spare. And you update that breaker, it's just going to label it as a branch circuit. So there's a couple different ways you can add downstream equipment. I really think a bunch of receptacle circuits on generic loads would just kind of clutter up the single line diagram, and it doesn't really matter what's on the side of that RP1 for these load analyses anyway. So we're going to stop there. We'll come back here in a minute and talk about some other pieces of Conduit.